Shabbat Shalom. There are many different tricky things within any religion, but one that is common among all faiths is the question of theodicy. Now, you always know that we're getting into something that people really don't want to talk about whenever they have wrapped it up in a fancy Latin term. Although actually I think is that Latin or Greek? That's Greek actually. I got to make sure I get my classical language correct, or else my 7th grade English teacher will be very cross with me. So theodicy is probably not a word that you use in a casual conversation, but I can guarantee it is something that you have thought about probably on a relatively regular basis. You probably know what under the phrase, why do bad things happen to good people? Or perhaps in your more bitter moments, why do good things happen to bad people? Those are both theodicy questions. Theodicy is the question of why does the world not seem to work according to the rules of justice that God has put in place? Why do bad things happen when they shouldn't happen? Why do the people who don't deserve bad things get them, and why do people who deserve bad things not get them? It is an innate sense. The same way that we have a sense of balance and we can have a sense of smell or a sense of taste, we also have a sense of fairness. Anybody who's ever worked with small children know that that sense of fairness kicks in very early in development. Some people never get past their warped idea of it, but it kicks in at a very early age. We have an intuitive desire that things be fair. And if we believe that things should be fair, and we believe that there is God, then the fact that things are not fair, well, that seems like a very big God problem. Everybody's on the same page, right? I know I throw a big vocabulary word out that doesn't get used a lot. I can lose a few people. I just want to make sure we understand when I use the word theodicy, this is the question that we are trying to unravel. Well, it may surprise you to learn Judaism has talked about this for a very long time. While many others like to avoid the conversation, Judaism, in its usual chutzpahdik way, jumps in and says, nope, we're going to try and talk about it, and has yet to come up with an answer that is satisfying to everyone. But the fact that we can't come up with a universally satisfying answer doesn't mean that there aren't some satisfactory answers to this question. And so I want to tease out a few as we are currently going through, already in 2025, numerous crises, both personal as well as national and international, that could make you question, why is God letting this happen? Or why is God making this happen when it seems so wrong? From the fires of Los Angeles to the wars in Israel to many other problems that are more personal or individual, I think all of us have questions even this early into this new year. Well, to understand one of the primary ways that Judaism unpacks this question of theodicy, we've got to take a little bit of a tour into the past. But don't worry, we're not going back very far. We're just going back to the 1930s. This is in Los Angeles, in what would now be called East LA. And there is a small home there. And in that home, there are 13 kids, about the same that we see in the story of Jacob's family, at least those that get any screen time and get named in the credits. But it's not exactly a wealthy home, but it's also not exactly a poor home. They get by, and even during the Depression, they've got enough to eat because the father of the household happens to run a vegetable cart, and therefore there's at least food on the table, even when many others don't have anything. The family is doing all right. They're good people, and yet one of their children, small teenage girl, gets hit by a drunk driver and killed. Why did God do that? Why would God punish this family that's working so hard just to make ends meet during one of the worst times of economic trouble, that is doing so well at being good people despite those challenges? Why would God steal their daughter from them? I mean, sure, they've got extra. My grandmother was one of them. This was my great aunt was killed by a drunk driver, obviously before I ever had a chance to know her, before my mother was even born, before my grandmother was even married. Why would God kill my great aunt? Well, Judaism's answer to that is God didn't do that. The drunk driver did that. Now, I was raised with that answer, which put me, I think, on a good foundation for dealing with these theodicy questions later. Because my grandmother, may she rest in peace, was adamant from a very early age that drunk drivers were among some of the worst evil in the world. Now, she wasn't trying to put them up against genocidal maniacs, but in terms of how bad of a person can you be, I was raised that if you are drunk and you get behind the wheel of a car, you are a monster. Because a person like that killed her sister. Not God, a person. That when we unpack many of our questions of why do bad things happen to good people, if we actually unpack that question and don't just leap to why did God do it, we'll usually find that there was some human agent that made some horrible choice that led to the outcome that we are now mourning and that we are now shaking our fist at heaven about. That there was somebody who chose to get behind the wheel of the car, even though they had drunk so much that they were not fit to probably walk down the street, let alone drive down it, and then to plow into my great aunt. That's not God's fault. That is an individual's horrible choice and the consequence that happens to others around us. And we can use this basic analysis to handle many of the problems. You probably are thinking about the fires in Los Angeles, certainly having lived there for 4 years. I have a great deal of pain watching parts of Los Angeles that we would frequent, having gone up in smoke. But I'm not asking why God is burning Los Angeles. And I'm certainly not going to make sermonic hay out of saying that they deserve it the way some people are trying to do. Instead, I'm going to point out something that I knew 20 years ago when I lived there. If you build a home on top of a tinderbox canyon, it will eventually burn. That is simply a fact of physics and geography. Fire goes up, and Los Angeles is always dry. It is a desert. Despite the pictures you've seen of lush Rodeo Drive and Beverly Hills, it is a desert. It does not have enough water. What water it has been stolen from other rivers and areas around the Southwest. But in and of itself, it does not have, and nobody is watering down all of the areas that aren't actually golf courses or other parks. Therefore, it is a giant tinderbox. So why did people build in canyons? Because it's gorgeous. It is absolutely stunning. The places that have been reduced to ash are some of the most beautiful places in the world. The views of the Pacific Ocean, the views just of the rest of the canyons are absolutely heartbreakingly beautiful. But they are built upon a matchbook. They are built upon things that will burn, and when fire burns, it goes up. And when the wind blows from the desert, what's called the Santa Ana winds, when it changes from the ocean and comes from inland out, it will be going fast, it will howl through those canyons, and it will dry everything even worse. And now we are getting even worse winds than ever before. The level of gusting and the length of the gusts and the frequency of them is higher than ever before in Southern Californian history. And so it should be no surprise that if you lay a great pile of kindling, that a small spark is going to set the entire place ablaze. So can we blame God for the spark? Sparks are going to happen. That is part of how the world works. We don't know yet exactly the cause of this one, or at least I haven't heard a particular cause, but we know sparks are going to happen, and if you have built upon a powder keg, you are going to get a boom. So we have to blame those who chose to build there. But you say, land in Southern California is at a premium. And if you've ever tried to buy a house in Southern California, you'll know that that's reflected in the price tag. Where were people supposed to build? They have to build if they're going to be there. Well, perhaps we need some development control. It's not our God-given right to continue to pour more people into an area that cannot support them. And it is certainly not God's fault when having decided to allow unchecked development to spread throughout all of these wild areas, that when we choose not to clear them of the brush that can burn, and when we most importantly choose not to invest in water infrastructure to fight fires and first responders to actually deal with the fires that may occur, just because it might be a freak event, we don't want to pay for the firefighters to be trained and on staff, and to callously decide that we can instead employ, in slave labor fashions, convicts to go fight the fires in the land that shouldn't have been developed and isn't properly protected by infrastructure in the first place, while paying them pennies on the dollar for putting their life on the line to protect someone else's property, I don't see why we're getting angry at God. God made none of those choices. In fact, God from day one has told us not to do something like this. And yet we do. And what's going to happen when the fires are gone? Does anybody here have a crystal ball to predict what will happen in 5-10 years in Los Angeles once the fires have all been died down? They'll rebuild, and there will be another fire. They're going to rebuild exactly where it was, and they're going to leave it exactly under the same conditions, and there will be a fire again. How do I know this? Because it's already happened before. And not just in the fires in Los Angeles. Does anybody here know of a state that has a great deal of oceanfront property that is gorgeous, beautiful places to live on pylons out into the bay, out into perhaps a gulf? And then there's a hurricane that comes along, and the house is moved 50 miles inland in various pieces. What happens after the winds have died down? You build the house right back in that same spot again and hope for the best? Complain to God? I'm sorry, what did you expect to happen? Now, if you are taking it already to the next step, and I know that many of you are always thinking about what I'm saying and beginning to find the chinks in the armor, let me point out one already. We just said in our Shacharit Amidah, and we're going to say it again in our Musaf Amidah, Mashiv Haruach Umorid Hagashem, that God is the one who causes the winds to blow and the rains to fall. So yes, maybe we were stupid for building on giant kindling piles. Maybe we're stupid for building in the middle of a hurricane zone. Maybe we're stupid for building in a flood zone. Maybe we are constantly underfunding what could be protection against some of these disasters. Maybe we do not properly prepare ourselves for these issues. Maybe we don't learn our lessons. But ultimately, it is still Mashiv HaRuach U'Marid HaGashim. It is the one who makes the wind blow and the rainfall that causes the problem. Because after all, if the Santa Ana winds hadn't come, the Los Angelinos could have lived on their tinderbox for years, happy and content. If there wasn't a wind and rain for a hurricane, then who would care if we were built out on pylons? Everything would be hunky-dory. Floodplains? Not a problem if the rain doesn't come so bad to make a flood. Yeah, missing the point. You see, when we say that God is Mashiv HaRuach U'Marid HaGashem, we are acknowledging that indeed the world has been created with meteorological systems that allow life to flourish. We are not saying that God is constantly directing a breeze here or a raindrop there. I know that there are some in our traditions that want to make those claims, and I'll be more than happy to go toe-to-toe with them on how they are distorting the teachings of our people for more than 2,000 years. Instead, God has promised us that there will be a system that allows life to flourish. God has made wind and rain which will make life flourish, but that doesn't mean that we can live wherever we feel like. Yes, there will be wind and rain that will make our crops grow, that will give us life, that will make the orchards blossom, but that doesn't mean you get to live in a floodplain. That doesn't mean you get to test God's willingness to defend your stupidity because you think you're righteous enough that God will keep the fire and the wind or the rain away from you. That's not how it works. In fact, it is precisely not how it works. And it is not how it should work. You see, when God made these meteorological systems, he made them systems, reliable systems, which means that we have the capacity to understand them. And that is a bigger gift than any particular random miracle you may be thinking you deserve. Because random miracles we can't predict. It's in the word random, which means I don't know where my house will be flooded or where my house will be burnt. I don't know if it's safe or not. If everything's random, if sometimes God's going to send a flood to destroy my house because he's angry that I broke Shabbat, and sometimes he's going to defend my house from a raging fire that is all around me and there's no way I should be able to get out of it, but he's happy because I gave tzedakah, then how do I know where to live? How do I know how to build my house? Why should I bother building my house to hurricane code in the first place? Why should I bother building my house to earthquake code? If God wants to kill my house, he'll kill my house. If he wants to protect my house, he'll protect my house. Why make an effort? Why try and do anything? If all I'm going to do is rely on miracles to either protect me or harm others that are unjust, why should I bother lifting a finger for anything at all? And that is not the view of traditional Judaism, despite the distortion of a few loud voices occasionally. Traditional Judaism says you don't rely on miracles. If the boat's leaking, when you're at the dock, you get out of the boat and don't say a miracle will get me across in this ferry. No, you get out of the boat because it's leaking. Or, even better, patch the boat. Judaism forbids us to rely on miracles because God has already blessed us with a rational mind and a comprehensible world. Like I said, we can all predict what happens if you build in the middle of a dry area and do very little brush clearing, do not build water infrastructure, and do not hire enough firefighters. We all know what's going to happen. You don't have to be a prophet to predict some miraculous scourge of fire. It is inevitable. And likewise, we also know that if you build somewhere that doesn't have those conditions and build in a fire-friendly way, you got a really good shot at not having your house burnt down. We've actually done a really good job of not burning down houses over the last century. The ones that get burnt now, mostly, are the ones that are built in places that reliably, predictably, almost inevitably will catch fire. But random house fires? When I grew up, they were still teaching us how to do fire drills in our home and all of that because fires in houses were still a very common thing. We've gotten much better at fixing those things. Why? Because God made this world comprehensible. We know how fire works, and we know what can cause it, and we know what can prevent it. And we've gotten better at translating that into action that does remove the possibility, or at least the potential, at least the probability of random fires in too many places. Yes, if somebody is being an idiot and tries to put out a raging grease fire in their kitchen by pouring a large bucket of water on it, then presto changeo, you're going to get your house burnt down. But you're not going to get your house burned down by random errors the way they would have 100 years ago. Even California learned a few of those lessons when the earthquakes in the 1920s taught them they should have flexible gas pipes so that when an earthquake hit, the stove popping away from the wall wouldn't release natural gas into the entire area to mix with flames and burn down cities worse than the earthquake itself had done. We can learn. This is the gift God gave us, the ability to learn. And God gave us the responsibility then. God said, look, I have given you a beautiful world with the wind and rains to make everything flourish as they should in their proper season. And I have given you a mind that can understand it. All you have to do is use your mind to understand my world, and you can ensure that no one has to go through the devastation that is facing Los Angeles, or that Florida faces with different hurricane problems, or tornadoes, or mudslides, or floods. All of that is avoidable. All of that is preventable to the nth degree, because God gave us a world that we could understand. He gave us a mind that is capable of understanding, and he gave us the hands to build, to train, to guide us to avoid these problems. And when we choose not to, we have the audacity to blame God. God, why didn't you stop this fire? God, why didn't you prevent this disaster? God, why didn't you prevent this war? God didn't make those things. God has been screaming at humanity for all of its existence the instructions of how to avoid all of these things. And we have continued to play deaf. We have continued to ignore it. And we have continued to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. There are real issues of theodicy. There are real questions of how the world works that causes pain and suffering that is beyond human control, prediction, and understanding. And we can talk about those at my table if you're interested in that. But much of what we complain about, much of the unfairness of the world that we rail against, is not the unfairness of God. It's the unfairness of us. The unfairness of individuals and groups and nations and all of humanity routinely making choices that we ought to know better. And doing it again and again and being surprised at the result. And then offering thoughts and prayers rather than actual remedies. We are a smart species. We're better than this. We've got to be better than this. Shabbat Shalom.